Hello everyone, the Nerdy Steve here, and today I wanted to do something a little different, and I wanted to really talk about a couple things I learned over the past week by playing a lot on the Alchemy ladder and playing a lot of the same deck and preparing for this qualifier weekend. It did not go well for me, but just because you don't do well in a tournament or on a specific day doesn't mean the preparation was for naught, right? And one of the things about, becoming a better Magic player, right, is being a very active learner and understanding, why things happened, and that's how you get better. So I wanted to share with you some things that I learned this week. So let's go. So the first kind of lesson that I learned this week was how to sideboard. And not that I don't know how to sideboard, but I definitely honed my skills this week. And one of the things that I really learned is, first of all, I'm not a huge sideboard guide person. I've used them in the past and I've made them. But to me, what's really important for sideboards and playing a deck is knowing when a card is good versus when a card isn't good. And one of the things that really helped me learn that and reinforce that idea this week was, so my deck, if you watch all these videos, it has a very low mana value in the main deck, right? And that's really good with Experimental Synthesizer because when you cast it, you exile the top card and you almost want to be able to play that land or play the card that you exile, right? So if, I Experimental Synthesizer on, turn 3 before my land drop, there's probably like a 90% chance I could play whatever I get off the top of my deck. But when I go to sideboard and I add Invoke Despair, right? And I'm not done yet, and will, not only am I increasing the mana value of my deck, the average mana value, by a significant amount, right? That's very relevant to Experimental Synthesizer now coming out and needing to go into the sideboard. And one of the interesting things about this specific change is I had to learn that, okay, now Experimental Synthesizer is in the sideboard, no longer in my main deck. That really does change the context of the gameplay patterns of the deck. Because Experimental Synthesizer in game one is always like a 2-for-1, and it's helping getting my card advantage and drawing me cards, and I can play it very aggressively. And that card now not being in my deck, it changes, my opening hands and my mulligan decisions. And it just changes a lot. And so not only is the sideboarding important, but now the gameplay is, while it looks so minute, I mean, we're just taking out 4 cards and we're adding, these high mana value cards. It really changes how you should play and approach the deck. Now my gameplay is also very different, and you have to learn to adapt and play things a little differently than you would otherwise. And so my biggest takeaway from this week was, okay, after you sideboard, you need to really assess how your deck looks, right? Because not only are you adding cards in, you're taking cards out, and it sounds so silly and obvious, right? But when you have really synergistic decks and you sideboard, you're really changing, like, the pattern of play, and so you need to adjust your gameplay otherwise. And that was really something that a couple of games into this sideboard plan, going, oh, okay, I get it now. I have to, I can keep hands with more lands more often, or I can't rely on these very cheap cycle effects from the experimental synthesizer. My Deadly Dispute now, right, has a lot less things I can sacrifice. So there's just a lot going on there. And that's why I always tell people I think sideboard guides, while they are helpful, knowing that what to take out and what to put in doesn't necessarily matter that much if you're not adjusting the play of what you're taking out and what you're putting in, right? You can't play the deck the same exact way because you're setting yourself up for failure. And I think that's a very, very important point that is very understated, and why people need to really lean into the sideboard guides and knowing, okay, I'm adding an Invoke Despair because I need to destroy enchantments and creatures, and I'm adding Will to, steal these creatures that I can't deal with reliably. Good, that's why I'm adding them in, but now my deck is very much changed, and I have to adapt how I get to that point to make the Invoke Despair and Will powerful, right? So that's just something I wanted to say and add, and I think it's a very, very good and important thing that, again, I know about, but like this week has really, really cemented that into me that like now that I'm sideboarding, I need to really, really understand and focus on why why not necessarily why I'm adding in cards and taking out, right? But now that I did that, how am I going to change things to make those sideboarded cards good, right? Does that make sense? I hope it does. Let's go to the next point. So I know Alchemy gets a lot of hate, but one of the past things over this week that I learned that I really, really liked about Alchemy. Now, this can happen in Real Magic too, with cards like Valky. But in Alchemy Viconia, this is a very, very relevant card in Alchemy. And it is fairly common with Viconia to conjure copies of an opponent's creature into your hand. And what that means is there are a lot of games where I will be using cards that I might have maybe seen or played with 3 times in this format, right? I have Viconia'd Diviner of Fates. I have Viconia'd, Lazelle, big Uvenwald entities or other mono green cards or other like Ambergris, and just so many random things, or not random, very, very good things. But using them well in your opponent's cards and knowing all these interactions is surprisingly skill intensive and like very, very draining in a strategical sense, right? If you play the same deck over and over again, you get to know all the intricacies, all the right ways to sequence your plays. And you get to know you're gonna do A, B, and C, and then you're gonna deal 9 damage and win this turn. But when you start to factor in that, oh, I have this game state and I know what I would do normally, but is stealing this opponent's creature from my graveyard gonna be better? And you have to be on the fly assessing things in a brand new way. And that was really, really freaking rewarding when, you did something and you found this new interaction that just worked very, very well. And so what I learned with specifically like Viconia and stuff like that is you have to learn to be very, very open. And I think Alchemy really, really helps people assess things in a very different way than you normally do. And I think that's a good thing because it can be brought into Magic as a whole. Because, again, with that type of effect, like Valky can steal a card from your opponent's deck. Now, this happens at a much more expensive rate and is a lot less common, right? And conjuring cards into your deck makes them a little different. But I want to make the point that sometimes learning to adapt and keeping an open mind is, what you need to do. And it's really, really hard to improve on that unless you practice it. But I think the alchemy format really, really pushes people into a very different magic play style and play pattern. And I think that's for the good because you can start to apply the openness and the possibilities that you need to consider to, standard and, explore a non MTG Arena exclusive card formats. And I think it's a really good way to help experiment and help players figure out how to, you know, interpret these card interactions on the fly and really, really learn to judge their effectiveness and how good they are. And yeah, like this is a really weird thing to, put into a talk about what I learned, but I know alchemy gets a lot of hate and I'm very pro alchemy, right? And I think this is something that a lot of people overlook. And I know it's part of the challenging aspect of alchemy and why people don't like it because it's quote unquote not real magic. But, you can play on Arena. It is real magic. And I do think avoiding this will actively make. I think people who want to avoid alchemy like mechanics are really doing themselves a huge disservice because alchemy mechanics and what and how to effectively use them is actually very applicable to, regular magic. You're working with cards that, like, specifically when the cards that you have to draft from a spell book, like Xander's Wake as well. You know, let's look at Tavern Swindler, or Horde Robber, or, Fangblade. The draft cards are really, really forcing you to make a decision out of three different possibilities very, very quickly. And you have to really be good at Magic to choose which one is the best in that situation. And sometimes it's very, very obvious, but a lot of times it isn't obvious. And I think a lot of people, because they don't like the spellbook mechanics and all of that, they're reverse and look away from it. But there's a lot you can learn by playing with these spellbook cards. It literally forces you to have to make a decision right there, and you have to judge, and you can be wrong and you can be right. But I think that's a very big opportunity for people to learn and to get better. And I think you need to embrace, these weird and interesting things because it forces you as a player to put yourself into these situations that you have to assess on the fly. And that's how you get better at Magic, right? Or one of the ways. There are lots of ways to get better at Magic. But I think it's a very understated thing for people to do. And I would highly, highly recommend, looking into this more and not poo pooing it. Because I think it will help you get better at Magic. And I learned that, and I've always liked alchemy, but I think this week's alchemy practice has really, really made me a better Magic player. So I would suggest you do it too. Thank you for listening to me ramble about what I learned this week. I hope this was at least somewhat informative. It was informative for me, and actually having to talk about it was really, really helpful. So thank you for listening to that regardless. And yeah, if you like what you see, you should totally comment, like, or subscribe. That's a great way to support me. You could also watch me stream live at twitch.tv/TheNerdySteve. I hope you all are looking forward to Dominaria previews. I had a hashtag WotC free sponsored preview that's on my Twitter that you could totally go look out. The links below. And again, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And yeah, I hope y'all have a wonderful morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.